there's any one go-to plan for what's going to work for all organizations out there. Even though with remote working, we're in this reactionary phase now, in the long term, I don't think it's going to be this fast process because change is fundamental. Interdepartmental functions, regulatory compliance, business processes, and even how we engage with customers. So all these things need to be addressed and taking into consideration the culture of the company. So I think an effective strategy in dealing with this in the non-technical sense is addressing these issues by establishing smaller, high-level task groups. They come together, they propose ideas around the core business, and then make decisions. When OccamSec shifted 100% to work from home, we were able to make these critical business decisions very quickly because of these smaller strategic groups.
Yeah, Tim, I think one last thing to add on that as well is, I think the focus needs to shift to, these are my critical assets, my critical processes. How do I secure those from a risk-based approach? Because we will kind of talk about that, but we never really do that. So there's a lot of focus right now on securing everything. But for many organizations, it's just not possible. So if you work out what is the core technical assets that impact my business, draw a circle around those, secure those, because it may turn out that, if one of your employees gets phished, you don't really care that much because they don't have access to those critical systems. So really drilling down into what's going to have the largest impact to the organization, identifying that, working out the risks, and then securing it.
So we've pretty much established that cultural issues, that culture trumps policy, are the core of what the discussions are going to be, and how we engage companies and organizations is going to be clear enough. How do we look at the dynamics of that culture to determine preferred outcomes? Mark, do you want to have a shot at that?
Yeah, I think that there's a tendency in cybersecurity to try and go for a one-size-fits-all approach, right? Even when you talk about company culture, right? So everyone should just do this. I think that as sort of fluffy as an answer as it might be, there does need to be a sort of, what's the culture of my organization and how do I make information security work within that? And that's evident once you look at, if you look at a large financial services company, the culture there around information security, around awareness of these issues is vastly different than the culture in a manufacturing company, at least where we've seen, right? So I think you have to play to those strengths, right? Don't say I can just impose this control based on this culture that works there in this other environment because it will fail, right? So you have to look at, what the culture is like and tailor the process and the program around that.
Right. Erin, and I apologize, being on mute, I didn't get a chance to introduce you. Erin Murtha, the Chief Operating Officer of OccamSec. What cultural issues have you been engaging with and the clients you've been working with? And we got to all say that we're very envious of the view out of the back window behind you.
Well, greetings from the Catskills, and thank you for having me. I think what we need to do is be able to anticipate and make plans for this work from home workforce. So we just need to go back to the basics. What are your organization's acceptable use policies? What are your business continuity plans? Taking into consideration the cloud, are there policies in place that protect your employees' intellectual property? Are you using VPN? These are necessary shifts in mindset that's happening now. So I think organizations need to bake in these expectations to their workforce because they've lost some control very quickly. Solutions like DLP are not always affordable, especially for the smaller sized organizations. And free solutions, and there's a slew of them out there, like free VPN, where there's tons of malware, introduces more risk. So I think it's important that you're educating the workforce, you're keeping them informed of high-level changes, these new policies. You need to make sure that your foundation is solid before you start implementing new tools. So not to mention that the existing tools you have, making sure that those are being managed and implemented properly too, which is in itself another challenge we're currently seeing because resources have been so stretched.
Right. And Aric, how do you implement those reiterations, I guess, and those emphasis on the basic processes and procedures that underline information security?
I mean, it's interesting. The red ball drills are all about process, you know, and much to Mark and Erin's point, it's a lot of things are site specific, and even dealing with the smaller issues, like there are HR components that are dealing with monitoring those that are hourly workers. You know, how are they doing that from a remote standpoint, and how do you do that without coming off as a big brother aspect, right? People already feel like you're encroaching on. Now they're at home and you're monitoring them, it makes people uncomfortable. So there, you know, different HR teams that I've worked with are really faced with these seemingly smaller issues that aren't really small at all because they increase anxiety.
So we've pretty much established that cultural issues, that culture trumps policy, are the core of what the discussions are going to be, and how we engage companies and organizations is going to be in clear net. How do we look at the dynamics of that culture to determine preferred outcomes? Mark, do you want to have a shot at that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a tendency in cybersecurity to try and go for a one-size-fits-all approach, right? Even when you talk about company culture, right? So everyone should just do this. I think that as you know, sort of fluffy as an answer as it might be, there does need to be a sort of, you know, what's the culture of my organization and how do I make information security work within that? And that's evident once you look at, you know, if you look at a large financial services company, the culture there around information security, around awareness of these issues is vastly different than the culture in a manufacturing company, at least where we've seen, right? So I think you have to play to those strengths, right? Don't say I can just impose this control based on this culture that works there in this other environment because it will fail, right? So you have to look at, you know, what the culture is like and tailor the process and the program around that.
Right, Erin, and I apologize. Being on mute, I didn't get a chance to introduce you. Erin Murtha, the Chief Operating Officer of OccamSec. What cultural issues have you been engaging with and the clients you've been working with? And we got to all say that we're very envious of the view out of the back window behind you.
Well, greetings from the Catskills, and thank you for having me. I think what we need to do is be able to anticipate and make plans for this work from home workforce. So we just need to go back to the basics. What are your organization's acceptable use policies? What are your business continuity plans? Taking into consideration the cloud, are there policies in place that protect your employees' intellectual property? Are you using VPN? These are necessary shifts in mindset that's happening now. So I think organizations need to bake in these expectations to their workforce because they've lost some control very quickly. Solutions like DLP are not always affordable, especially for the smaller sized organizations. And free solutions, and there's a slew of them out there, like free VPN, where there's tons of malware, introduces more risk. So I think it's important that you're educating the workforce, you're keeping them informed of high-level changes, these new policies. You need to make sure that your foundation is solid before you start implementing new tools. So not to mention that the existing tools you have, making sure that those are being managed and implemented properly too, which is in itself another challenge we're currently seeing because resources have been so stretched.
Right, and Aric, how do you implement those reiterations, I guess, and those emphasis on the basic processes and procedures that underline information security?
I mean, it's interesting. The red ball drills are all about process, and much to Mark and Erin's point, it's a lot of things are site specific, and even dealing with the smaller issues, like there are HR components that are dealing with monitoring those that are hourly workers. How are they doing that from a remote standpoint, and how do you do that without coming off as a big brother aspect, right? People already feel like you're encroaching on. Now they're at home and you're monitoring them, it makes people uncomfortable. So there, different HR teams that I've worked with are really faced with these seemingly smaller issues that aren't really small at all because they increase anxiety. I think actually an interesting question to ask is, how well were people dealing with insider threat before this started? And the answer to that is not very well. I mean, you only in the last, I would say, 2 years, and Mark and Erin, you deal with this more than I do, but I'd say the last 2 years is when insider threat became a buzzword or buzzwords, where unless you were already involved in InfoSec, you probably hadn't heard of insider threats before, from a cyber perspective and how people handle it. So, that's one of the problems that you're going to see companies that didn't deal with it before. It's going to be very difficult to deal with it after. That being said, they can start with a clean slate, so they can now build something for the situation that we're in, as opposed to trying to implement policies that they had if they were in a normal workspace onto a remote workforce.
Erin, what's yours? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think organizations are still figuring out what works for them. Contingency plans are in the making. We, OccamSec, have a strong technical side, and so we were able to be agile and move quickly to remote work. But I think the answer lies beyond the technical aspect, and going back to the cultural part, that's going to play a vital role in being successful in moving forward in the shift, because going back to on-prem work is going to have to answer the big question, which is why. In the short term, I think that health reasons will play a role in it, but the work-life balance will play an even larger role now and also in the long term. So it's a balancing act from all perspectives. It's cultural, it's personal, it's technical, and then with that will come organization-specific strategies.
Mark, you want to add anything to that set of observations?
Yeah, I mean, I agree, right? I mean, insider threat for a long time was this kind of abstract notion that people only sort of, they thought that accounting fraud was insider threat, but they never thought about all the cyber aspects. And where it's become more of an interesting problem now is that we're used to sort of saying insider threat is whoever is in my organization and in my network. Well, now your network is in, 5,000 people's homes, and it's on the beach with them. And it's, I mean, there were always those kind of like deviations from the network perimeter. But now, the network is everywhere with the increase in clouds and applications that are in Microsoft Office and in Amazon. Your network is now just this big open target space, and all those insider threat risks are now elevated because technically there is less oversight on people from just being in the office. And also, yeah, there's anxiety because you're working from home. There's distractions. It's much easier to manipulate someone and get that insider threat to be realized than it probably was, 5 months ago.
Right, and that aspect of what's inside your organization goes to another set of questions we wanted to explore. You've had to look for new suppliers for critical goods and services. Some of the diligence has to be discarded in that rush to acquisition. What process and supply chain assessment tools have CISOs and other risk managers been able to insert or rely upon against that threat, just by having to use new tools? Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I can make a shameless plug that we made a third-party vendor assessment tool to deal with this very problem, right? So from a cyber perspective, the risk of third-party vendors has been there for a long time. So many years ago, when I was far more malicious in my cyber activities than I am now, we used to breach financial services companies via systems like Reuters and other news systems, right? So you would plug in this external environment into your network. You know, that problem has grown exponentially since then, right? So I think that looking at tools that allow you to assess, you know, what's the risk that this vendor poses to me in regards to my business, right? If you just take, you know, if you take NIST or the SIG or any of those third-party vendor assessment programs, the problem is when you send it to a vendor to do, first of all, the vendor's like, now I've got to do this again. But also it's not specific to your business, right? Because you may not really care what their DR plan is because DR isn't that important and this vendor isn't that critical to you. So I think that tools that allow organizations to assess a vendor in terms of what's important to the organization, I think that's critical at this time because there's lots of systems you can buy that give you ratings and so on, and they all provide some useful bits of information, but it's far too generic. It doesn't tie back to an organization, so the person tasked with dealing with it is just getting more and more noise that they can't deal with. And that's a common complaint that CISOs have made to me for years, and it's only getting worse. And this third-party vendor information is now just increasing the amount of noise that they have to try and wade through, which inevitably means they go and hire someone to deal with all the noise and so on and so forth.
So where does that responsibility lie? Is it with the C-suite and sort of setting up what are the business critical issues? Is it with risk managers, chief financial officers?
I think it has to be a unified approach, right? Which I realize is the easiest answer to that. But I mean, the best information security programs, if we want to label them as that, is where the security office is talking to the business. So they have input from the CFO or the COO or whoever they can talk to get information on what does my organization really do. If we're a school and we do work with schools, we need to provide education to our students in this remote situation. So that's our critical function. How do we secure that? What's important? If you're a bank, it's going to be account information, M&A work, and so on. So talk to the CFO, talk to the business. And that should permeate throughout all cybersecurity stuff. I think ultimately third-party vendor work, as far as we're aware, still mostly lies with procurement. And procurement will kick off the process and say, we want to hire vendor X. And then security is called in to do an assessment. But most of the time, it's missing that business piece. And then then inevitably what happens is information security says, this vendor, I have some concerns. Someone on the business side pops up and says, we don't care because we want to use this vendor and this is beneficial to us. And then the security assessment just gets put in a filing cabinet somewhere.
Right. So queuing off of your phrase that there is no perimeter, Aric, do you want to talk about some of the perimeterless organizations you've been working with and where they found new challenges during this COVID time?
I mean, I'd actually throw that question over to Mark because it was based on his comment. I'm curious. Sorry, man, but I'm kind of curious too. So
the only perimeterless, the only organization that really embraces this is Google, right? So Google, there's a concept called Xero Trust, which has been around in various forms for a few years. But Xero Trust is this idea that, every endpoint, you don't trust it. So it's working on its own, it's secured and so on. So Google kind of embraced this notion. But really, again, every organization at this point doesn't have a perimeter. So if you're a company and you use Salesforce, right? Salesforce exists outside of your environment and you're sending data to it. So you've just punched a hole through your perimeter. If you use AWS You've punched a hole. If you use O365, you've probably plugged in your Active Directory system so you can authenticate. So every network is kind of having more and more holes plugged into it. So I think at this point, almost everyone is a perimeterless environment. I've yet to come across someone in recent security work, and by recent I mean the last 10 years, who doesn't have some hole punched into their network, either for a vendor to come in or someone to do some support or to send data out. Or I mean, it's just got bigger and bigger. And the rush to the cloud has expedited this because the cloud is seen as a cost-saving opportunity. So the more you push out there, the better. But you've still got to have the people in your organization accessing those resources. So I think everyone at this point is perimeterless. Google have kind of put a box around it. This is Xero Trust. It used to be called the Jericho Forum back in 2006. And just, yeah, so everyone doesn't have a perimeter right now. I mean, everyone's on their cell phone reading their email, right? Once you started doing that, that was the end of the perimeter. You can't control what's going on out there. And so your fundamental approaches to security break down.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead,
I would add to that, just from the perspective of threats, other threats coming in, several companies I deal with, because people online, look, 3 months ago, maybe 70% of the population had never heard of Zoom, right? Now everybody's suddenly savvy and knows how to put on backgrounds, except me. I have not figured it out yet. It looks terrible when I do it. But, now that people are getting online more, social media threats are escalating, like enormously. And for esports companies that were used to dealing with it because 99% of their customer service is online, for those that never dealt with social media threats, they're jumping at every person who tweets, I hope the CEO of this company dies. And that's a problem because there's a lot of wasted man hours and woman hours to actually deal with those threats that really you don't need to spend time on. So identifying a level of threat and how you respond to that threat becomes critical. There's a big difference between I hope the CEO dies and I am coming to kill the CEO, right? You would not treat those the same way. And then there's another level of not only am I coming to kill the CEO, but I know his address is at this location. Well, now you're really launching an investigation. And people's inclination might be to immediately call law enforcement. But you actually might want to wait on that because there might be information you need to get before law enforcement is involved. So it's a lot of dynamics, and I think companies that are not used to social media threats need to start figuring out how they're going to deal with them when they come in because they will be more frequent.
Erin, so assuming that work from home is going to be greatly expanded, and the challenges going forward seem to be authenticating who you're dealing with, hiring new employees, the use of social media by those employees, the culture around that in a distributed workforce. You got any thoughts or ideas about how to address that?
I think like what Mark was saying, I think the network perimeter has been extended beyond the confines of an office anyway. So we're in this reactionary moment, and some of our customers are having the ability to work from home within their 5-year plan. So what do you do when one day becomes day one? And I think that's where we are right now. The cloud has made this easier to do, but again, managed by third parties. So on top of, so I think authentication is basically going to be key. Mark brought up this Xero Trust concept, but then we have to take into consideration other things, like that also introduces the TLS 1.3. So authentication, which is zero RTT, so round trip time, and it's going to allow a person to authenticate on a server, and then when you come back, you don't have to authenticate again. So there are other issues that are going to be brought in that we need to figure out how we're going to deal with that. If those servers aren't configured properly and maintained properly, those are huge issues. So I think we're in a direction where we're going to be seeing these new tools emerge, and it's going to be around authentication, possibly with facial recognition, biometrics, things like that. Monitoring and surveillance has obviously also increased in the last few months especially. So I think that's the direction that we're moving towards.
And do those bring additional cultural challenges to organizations?
You know, I think it will, but I think it's just all adaptable. I mean, it's for the greater good of the workforce. I think in identifying your assets and knowing what those assets are, I think we're also seeing with this pandemic that our people are also should be seen as an asset too. So I do think that these will adapt to cultural. I don't think there's going to be any major cultural implication in companies, in other words.
Yeah, Tim, I think this comes back to earlier as well. I mean, I think we've almost gone full circle in half an hour, right? I mean, this comes back to that reactionary mindset, right? So nothing's really changed, right? Networks always allowed you to work remotely from the system you were trying to get to, right? That's the whole point of client-server environments, right? So it's kind of like nothing's changed, but the physical space has changed, and the impact that has on people has changed. So I need to work out controls that will help address that issue, as well as kind of like working out how I don't just spend money on everything and just bankrupt myself. So I focus on my core processes and core controls. So you may need enhanced authentication, and you may need enhanced monitoring of your employees and all that stuff, if you can figure out a valid business reason for it. I think it all kind of goes back to those concepts.
To that end, are you seeing any groups, companies, industry sectors that are standing out where the increased attention to information security processes and procedures is increasing the value of that enterprise? We're using Zoom. We know Zoom has grabbed huge market share. So increase in value to enterprises going on, but are there any particular things coming from information security capabilities or practices?
I think what we're likely to see is a couple of, there will be attempts to differentiate yourself based on cybersecurity. So many moons ago, when I worked at an investment bank, and we deployed two-factor authentication to clients, we advertised this as like, we do this and nobody else does, so we rock. So I think opportunities will be there for that. I suspect what will happen is, from a practical sense, local government is going to have less revenue come in because there'll be less tax money being produced. So there'll be more emphasis now on enforcing things like New York Shield, California's CyberSecurity Act, all those acts, which will then lead to companies being fined, which will then put them more visible in everyone's mind because, hey, that company got fined because of a security breach. Therefore, I'm going to go over to that company that hasn't been fined. So I think that's where you'll start to see some competitive advantage come through. Because New York Shield, for instance, was pushed back, sort of. But now it will come back in force. There are there's stuff around Sarbanes-Oxley, the SEC. All those organizations have these frameworks, regulatory frameworks ready. And I think that we'll see a push to get those in place because of what's going on, and mostly to drive up revenue. And therefore, if you pass those, you'll have competitive advantage.
And does that come along with trying to differentiate yourself from competition by demonstrating more reliability or any other information security posture?
Yeah, I think resilience has been the buzzword for 2 years now, right? And it's becoming a real thing now. So, resilient organizations, ones that do have these good processes, these good controls, they're going to be noticed. Even from a hiring perspective, right? So we work in information security. most information security people don't like the concept of additional monitoring around what they do, right? I know I do, right? So I think that if you have good security controls in place that perhaps don't get interpreted in a certain way by the potential staff, that gives you an edge in the hiring process, right? Which then, given the fact that everyone's on social media, they'll say nice things about you. So there definitely is some advantages to be born from this. We're still trying to work out how they're going to play out. But I think, yeah, I certainly think there are things you can do that will gain you points, that will make you look better to the public, that whoever you're trying to sell to, and to people that you're trying to recruit in some spaces.
Right. Are there things that people are spending money on right now that, despite the kind of push down on budgets, that will put them in a better position to make those claims? That's for you probably, Mark. You might have a better sense of.
I thought I was going to stop talking for a while. Sorry.
Afraid not.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, right, we're doing a lot of assessment work, right? So there's a lot of penetration testing, application security work, red team work. I mean, everyone is looking to test the security of their network right now, because that perimeter is gone, and now I can breach someone's network at home, and boom, I'm in your company network, right? So we're seeing a lot of work around assessments, what's going on there. We've done some work around social media attacks you can do. So a lot of the emphasis, for the most part, is on phishing, getting emails. Most people aren't actually reading email all day, every day. Statistically, I mean, it seems like a lot of people are on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram a lot, right? So we can do social engineering attacks and tests through those mediums. We've actually breached organizations just using LinkedIn to make fake profiles, friend people, gather information, and then they give you a password. There are some more intricacies to that, but I won't go into it. But that sort of stuff. And then analysis around VPNs, how resilient is my network going forward? What do I do to make sure that in the event of a security incident, I can respond properly? So simulations to do training around IR, that's pretty popular right now. So those are the things that we're seeing traction in. And then the other big bucket is, this is what I've got deployed right now. How do I squeeze more out of it? Because I'm being asked to do more with less. So if you've got a monitoring system, what are the gaps? What's it not doing? What can it do? How quickly can we make it do those things based on this risk, either real or perceived, that we have to deal with?
So, Erin, you touched on this earlier on, talking about the introduction of new technologies to do authentication. There are other things that have come along with COVID, such as employers testing their staff before they're allowed back in the workplace with thermal cameras and other ways of testing for the virus. Do you have any thoughts about particular concerns for employee privacy, liability with the use of these technologies, knowing that in the end it all becomes data and data for the organization to have to manage?
Yeah, I mean, definitely organizations are using new tools, like Aric mentioned earlier, video conferencing, remote access, information sharing. And it extends beyond our workforce too. It's gonna change the way that we engage with our customers. So I think it's important to consider what testing has been undertaken to make sure that these tools are secure and not creating more vulnerabilities. So we often see, and I addressed it before, where these tools and even the tools that we have now, they're just misconfigured or they just aren't working as intended because they just weren't implemented properly. So, I mean, I think we still need to we have to do the risk assessments. We have to have business continuity plans. We have to do the threat modeling. And I think that's where we are now and where we're moving, which to Mark's point also is kind of where we've always been.
And Aric, you might have some thoughts on that as you do a lot of work in the event space and arenas, and how those technologies are going to be used in the public space, let alone some of the security issues around monitoring the civil protests that are going on right now.
Yeah, I mean, man, the riots really didn't help. They've created a lot of chaos for everyone, and really got a lot of people thinking about their business continuity. You know, both Mark and Erin talked about business continuity and the importance of that. And it woke them up to like, wow, we don't have an alternate location for our data, you know, or how do we maintain our operations consistently, you know, if somebody cuts our cable. I literally talked to a client this morning where during the riots, somebody took a drill to the system outside and cut the internet to the entire building, essentially. You know, they had backup, but it was, you know, somebody went that far to destroy elements of that building. And these things are going to pop up. And not just that, but the comfort level, you know, from a remote work standpoint, a lot of these threats are electronic, but bringing people in, thinking that you're going to rotate people from remote work into the workspace. You know, if everybody on here thinks for a second about how they felt, you know, when they were out of school for 2 weeks or even for the summer, and that day before you started school, you were kind of nervous. Like, oh, what if I forgot everything from last year? Even if you're out of work for a week from vacation, you might actually have a little anxiety before you go back to work after that week. Imagine 3 months of quarantine, and imagine working now and having people come back in, and they're riddled with anxiety because they've been gone for so long. And even how they interact with people is different. And you'll have people that are very cognizant of hygiene and those that are not cognizant at all. And there will be conflict there. So, you know, with event spaces, it's how you deal with events when those come back. And, you know, many clients are planning for 2021. Most events have been canceled for this year. But it's coordinating with that event space. Are they providing masks? Are you providing masks? Most are not going to take temperature data because they don't want to deal with it, especially ones that deal with children, because anytime you have any piece of data on a kid under the age of 18, you know, you're opening a whole door for yourself. So they're trying to reconfigure how they protect the space there as well. So there are going to be a lot of challenges, and honestly, not many have come up with solutions yet because they haven't had to deal with it yet. It's really talking through process prior to determine what things you can put in place to make it a little bit safer. Right.
We have a question from the audience about the fines that go along with cyber regulation. Which ones are going up? You mentioned a couple. Which ones might go down? And what are the implications for the commitment of resources given that? Are there any that are going to go down, Mark?
I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so I'll do this from my perspective, what I know. I don't think any of them are going to go down. I think that what happened was, if you look at like the New York Cyber Shield stuff, it was meant to be operational now, but it's kind of been pushed back a little bit. But then, you know, it will start to kick up, fines will start to kick in. The SEC is starting to put in some actual case law around stuff related to cybersecurity incidents, and specifically around Sarbanes-Oxley. They seem to be talking more about that. And then there's the California Privacy Act as well. So I don't think any of them are going to go down. I suspect for the next 6 months, enforcement will be light. But then I think once we're into 2021, then enforcement will ramp up. The good thing is that controls are somewhat consistent across the board. So if you do have, you know, a good security program, then you're probably going to be okay, right? I mean, because a lot of it's going to be around showing, you know, duty of care. Did you do what you were supposed to do? So for instance, if you take something like two-factor authentication, right? Just to give a quick specific example, two-factor authentication up until last year was optional, right? Use it if you can. At this point, two-factor authentication is being considered by the SEC and by some other organizations as you should just have this by default, right? So if you don't have two-factor authentication on your email system and you get compromised, you're going to be fined, right? That's where things are starting to go, right? The bar is slowly rising. And I think next year we'll see more and more enforcement.
Will it be a time when, because this will be new, that like we've seen in other security arenas, if you're slightly more secure than your competitor, that's the way you need to posture yourself because they'll get caught before you will? Or will it be more random than that?
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately, yeah, that's right. I mean, there's always this kind of concept that, you don't have to be, you just have to make sure you run faster than the slowest person so they get eaten by the bear. That applies from an external perspective, right? If someone's trying to hack companies, they're going to go after probably the easiest target. So I think for a while, yeah, it's going to be, you just need to be better than, your competitor, so they're more likely to get fined, which is really not a great state of affairs. And in the long run, it won't work because there's some stuff that we've been looking into whereby actually, if I am the most secure organization, there's this terrible problem that if I get breached, everyone else who's less than me can now be breached as well, right? So it may not work in practice, but again, I think for next year, making sure that you have, decent security controls, you are doing all the right things for your organization, that's where you need to be.
Right. Aric, do you have anything else you want to share?
No, one thing, in terms of social media threats, is there going to be a problem, for companies that, well, even if you've anticipated it, finding an investigator who can find the, personal information of users on social media, getting those networks in place, having your contacts in law enforcement ready so that when a threat comes in, you can quickly dial up, the resources you need to investigate a threat if you need to do it. We don't do investigations because it's terrible. It's terrible work. It's hard, and people have to be really good at it. But identify them now so that you can have those resources in place. And if you haven't talked to local law enforcement about, dealing with social media threats, or even understanding if your local law enforcement has a cyber division, which not everybody does. If you're in New York, they have every division, right? So, even international, they have their own CIA, but for smaller locations, Nashville, other cities, they don't have those resources necessarily, or they're certainly not as robust. So understanding what resources you have available becomes super critical when you're dealing with social threats in general.
Erin, do you have any last word to add?
No, I'll just say I just happened to be reading an article yesterday on the New York Shield Act. So I know that these fines, these penalties they can be pretty hefty. I think up to $250,000. So it's definitely something that organizations will need to consider moving forward. And then just another last point too, you asked earlier about how we stand out and from competition. And I think it's also important to note too that because we are in where I think we used to be in these swim lanes, this is my company, that's your company, this is my industry, that's your industry. With third-party systems, we're starting to become in the same boat, so to speak. We're becoming more interconnected. So I think it's important to remember that also as we're going forward too.
I think actually that's the most important thing in all of this, right? So I think that, for so long we drew boxes around our organizations and said, this is me, that's you. But it is all gone now, right? So, I mean, in the longer term, the only way we're going to fix this in a way that's, sustainable is to realize that, yeah, we're actually all in the same swim lane. And therefore, everyone's security is somewhat interdependent on everyone else. That's really the only way that this will end well for everyone. Which might put me out of work, but that's
well, I don't think nothing I heard suggested there wasn't a full employment act for cybersecurity professionals. To that end, we're going to indulge you for 2 more minutes to get to one more question. Are internal threats from employees becoming a bigger issue? That's the first question. And if so, should large companies be concerned particularly, and what should they do?
I'll jump in first, but I mean, from what I've seen even immediately, it's certainly becoming a larger issue. You just have more reason for conflict. Don't forget, when you send an email, it's really a terrible way to communicate. You can't hear voice inflection. How often have you had an email misunderstood because it wasn't phrased the right way, right? So all these employee interactions that are now happening virtually, you know, not necessarily on Zoom, but, you know, through email or through other, will create conflict. Disputes on dealing with coming to the workplace. People saying, you know, why do I have to come back from working remotely? It's been working fine so far. So how do you tell somebody who's afraid to come back to work that they need to come back to work? Well, you have to reevaluate what's a critical function. Do they actually need to be at work? Be honest with what you're doing. And I would say, you know, run site-specific scenarios, because your culture, your company is going to be different, and you have to talk through the process of what kind of threats might happen, whether it's bullying, whether it's direct threat. Look, domestic issues are still going to happen online. You know, in fact, it might happen more so as people feel that there's anonymity and they can communicate differently as they're online. So I would very heavily consider running scenarios to talk through, you know, issues that you think might impact your organization.
Right.
And
I think it's,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Bob.
oh no, I mean, I was going to say, I mean, I saw like a quick flash of the word furlough pop up on my screen. I mean, I think that's a really important point, right? If you're an employee and you've been furloughed for 3 months and then you go back to work, how positive are you going to feel about your employer, right? I mean, it's nice they called you back to work, but, you know, they kind of made it seem like you might be expendable in the long run, right? So I think that, unfortunately, the downside here is going to be that there are going to be a lot of people who are going to be questioning, you know, their place in the organization now, right? Obviously, there's 40 million unemployed people, right? And they've, you know, a lot of those probably going to have organization data. So I think, yeah, the insider threat risk is probably going to increase. I think that it's not, I mean, it probably impacts big organizations more because they have more employees, but it's going to be across the board, right? Because a lot of small companies had to let people go, had to furlough and so on. All that's going to play out in this, right? The cybersecurity world is trying to put out there, you know, more people are unemployed, so more people are going to be hackers. That's not really going to happen. You can't download a book and suddenly become Neo from the Matrix. It just doesn't work that way. So I feel like the insider threat in the immediate future is probably going to be even more of an issue, right? Because people are going to come back, they're going to be concerned, they're going to be uncomfortable, you know, all this stuff is going to play out. I don't know how long this is going to last. Maybe I'll see if there's something I can do that puts me in a bad spot.
Well, Mark, Erin, we truly thank you for joining us this week. Feel free to send us additional comments, concerns, and questions to info@redballdrills.com. And if they're more appropriate to go to OccamSec.com, we'll send them there. Please join me in thanking our excellent panelists, and we look forward to talking to you in a couple of weeks about the world of esports security challenges. So thank you, and have a good afternoon, evening, or wherever you are across this globe.